हेलो। हाँ। शॅल वी स्टार्ट 10:30 म्हटले आपण थांबायचं नाही 5 मिनिट का सुरू करतो. हा हा. नाही नाही तुझी व्यवस्था नाही म्हणजे आवाज म्हणजे कारण कॅम्पस वेगळा असल्यामुळे म्हणू का. ठीक आहे. चालेल चालेल. ठीक आहे. ओके. मी केलं होतं पण मागे एकदा थोडं. सर 2 मिनिटात सुरू. गुड मॉर्निंग. गुड मॉर्निंग वन अँड ऑल प्रेझेंट ओव्हर हिअर. ओके. I welcome you all on behalf of Institute for Oriental Studies and VPM Joshi Bedekar College to this wonderful lecture on the topic Dharma or Moksha, what is the aim of human life. As we all are aware about the present context in which we are living, recently there is a book which has come up by Yuval Noah Harari, and he says, and the title is 21 Lessons for 21st Century. And he says that in the age of misinformation, clarity is power. And we are living in the age of misinformation, friends. So where is the knowledge? Lost in information, as we talk about. And the motto of our institution is from knowledge to wisdom. So at this very pretext, I welcome you all for this lecture. I welcome all the dignitaries, Dr. Koenraad Elst, who has come for all along from Belgium. Let me tell you, my friends, he has 2 months packed program. He is going to trot the entire India in next 2 months. And he has spared only 2 days for Mumbai and one day he is sparing for all of us. Dr. Vijay Bedekar was supposed to attend the program, but he is listening to us online. I welcome him as well. And Dr. Koenraad Elst is a noted philosopher, Indologist, and great scholar. After our program, we are going to have a visit to Institute for Oriental Studies as well. I also welcome the principal of our college, Dr. Suchitra Naik, madam. I welcome Dr. Nitin Joshi, sir, who is the principal of this institution. And I very happy to tell you that the auditorium in which we are sitting is named after a famous grammarian, Panini. So previously we had arranged it in Katyayana, now it is in Panini. So we all are gathered here to listen to him. I also welcome Dr. Nayak sir, who is the principal of our Polytechnic College, and other dignitaries, vice principals, and head of the departments, and all my fellow colleagues and my wonderful students. I now start with felicitation of the guests. I request Dr. Suchitra Naik, madam, to felicitate our guest, Dr. Koenraad Elst. Please put your hands together, friends. Mhm. Yeah. And there is a shawl. Yes, a typical Indian way of felicitating our guests, as we call Atithi Devo Bhava. And he has come all along from Belgium. Shreya, photo. I also welcome other dignitaries, those who have come to the college. This is our college newspaper. Our students edit that. It's a 16-page wonderful newspaper. Yeah, and it is the name has been suggested by Dr. Bedekar. It is Rita. Rita means, I hope we all know. Huh? It is the universal idea that equilibriums the things. Thank you. Please have a seat. Thank you very much. I now request Suchitra madam to please felicitate Dr. Joshi sir and Nayak sir as well. Just a flower. Yeah. Hello. Yes. And I request Dr. Mahesh Patil sir afterwards to felicitate our principal Dr. Suchitra Naik. I welcome all the people, all dignitaries from the college, outside from the college. There are some people, Dr. Sheshadriji has come, and there are many other scholars. They have come to listen to Dr. Elst. Before I start, let me, Dr. Elst, I would like to tell you, Institute for Oriental Study was established in the year 1983 in the city of Sri Sthanak, as we call it, Thane, with the history and tradition of more than 1,500 years. The institution is the city in which we are living. It mainly studies and disseminates Indian culture, customs, traditions, values, ideology, and Sanskrit language. The study of human culture includes all the events necessary for human existence. Although the subject of history is being studied in the institute, it is the brainchild of Dr. Vijay Bedekar. The scope of the study of Oriental studies is wider and deals with combined study of many other subjects like history, anthropology, geography, sociology, philosophy. The two main facilities required for this study are the reference library and a museum. Today, Institute possesses more than 3,500 books, 35,000 books, including Sri Geet Govindam, published in 1651, Balaramayanam 1869, Shabda Vyutpatti Kaumudi 1872, Shri Bhasha Manjuri Sanskrit and Prakrit 1874, various types of encyclopedia, various dictionaries, gazetteers, journals of various reputed institutions, magazines, internationally published magazines, and newspapers. Institute possesses more than 35,000 manuscripts like Swatmabodha, Ashwalayana Smriti, Saukuntaka, then Shraddha Vidhi, Bhishma Tarpan, and very rare manuscripts, handwritten manuscripts, and some antiquities and sculptures, old coins, Portuguese period Ranjan, and other inscriptions as well. The other collaborating institution, that is Vidya Prasarak Mandal Joshi Bedekar College. We are one of the leading colleges in Thane city in Mumbai. We have autonomous institution, and we run so many interesting programs from ranging from philosophy to anthropology, languages, media, and whatnot. So on this occasion, I request now to start our program to have some opening remarks by our principal madam, Dr. Suchitra Naik.
Respected dais, Dr. Koenraad, Elst, other dignitaries, Dr. Nayak sir, Dr. Nitin Joshi, Sri Vidya madam, my esteemed members from management, my dear colleagues, and my dear students. Prashant sir, thank you very much for giving nice and brief introduction about Oriental Study Institute, Vidya Prasarak Mandal, and also colleges in the campus. It's vision of Dr. Vijay Bedekar, which helps us to, enjoy such feasts. maybe sometimes from Chinese scholars, sometimes from Japanese scholars. And today we have Dr. Elst from German tradition. All those who study philosophy and history understand what is the importance of German tradition. If we talk of human culture and human civilization, every civilization tries to give some authentic response. And, if it comes to that, I suppose, German philosophers time and again have responded very authentically to human condition, which takes German tradition and philosophy to be, it becomes most relevant and most important. To talk in terms of, modern times, postmodern times, starting right from Kant and Nietzsche, and to talk of recent history, Habermas and Gadamer, it may be democracy, it may be time, it may be cosmology. Everywhere we find that, German tradition has very authentically responded always to philosophical problems and philosophical issues. Now, see, whenever we talk of Oriental institution or Oriental wisdom, okay, and German philosophers, we can't miss this name of Max Muller. Now, Max Muller has almost become in Mumbai, in Maharashtra, as well as in India. It's like, our own philosopher, Max Muller, who perhaps made the Western modern tradition aware of Oriental wisdom and Oriental know-how. And we find many echoes in both the traditions, Indian philosophy and German philosophy. Many echoes are there, right from Kant's philosophy and his ethics, especially his preconditions to morality, which talk about reincarnation, rebirth, so on and so forth. So, this tradition is there, or it may be very authentically changing the meaning of democracy, which has happened. Germany and many European countries have now gone to participatory, if I'm not mistaken, participatory model of democracy. We boast always that we are in the largest democratic state of world. I think we also need to learn and be more participative in our democracy to make it more fruitful. One of the recent psychiatrists, Viktor Frankl, he said that meaning is not given. We need to create meaning in life. And he has become pioneer of logotherapy. The positive psychology has taken after him and says that if we want happiness in life, we need to create our own meaning, we need to create our own goals. Indian tradition knew this long back, and they talked about theory of purusharthas, which introduces four goals of human life: artha, kama, dharma, and moksha. So, but how to reach this moksha? Or are they exclusive, or they synchronize together? That is what we are today interested in knowing from our esteemed scholar. But I'm reminded of one very interesting concept from Bhagavad Gita, Lokasangraha, which says that, okay, it may be moksha, your own liberation, but even after your own liberation, you have to work consistently towards sarvamukti, that is liberation of others, liberation of every soul. Now, there are many connotations of this simple philosophy at social level, at political level, and in the context of democracy, and of course, in the context of soteriology, that is spiritual liberation. With these remarks, I would like to close because we are eager to know from Dr. Elst. Thank you very much. And students, it's going to be a feast. Don't miss this opportunity. I'm pretty sure if you are studying history and philosophy, you will get deepen understanding of the same. And if you are not studying it formally, you will be attracted to study these subjects. Thank you very much. Have a nice day, all.
Thank you very much, madam. As ma'am has rightly pointed out, Loka Sangraha and Loka Mukti. As Gita says, Loka Sangraha Mevapi Sampashan Kartumarhasi. So I think I now stand just to introduce the guest and then we'll listen to him. As madam has rightly pointed out, all students are requested to listen to him and we'll have a wonderful question and answer session afterwards. Uh, I'll formally introduce our guest, Dr. Koenraad Elst. He has obtained his doctorate in Oriental philology and history from Catholic University of Leuven, Belgium in 1998. This was based on his MA degrees in sinology, Indo-Iranian studies and philosophy and research. He has a research stay at Banaras Hindu University as well. He worked mostly as a foreign desk journalist. Students of media studies are also here, friends. So he has worked as a foreign desk journalist, both freelance and in employment, and served as a foreign policy assistant to the Belgian Senate. He is a chairman of Ram Swaroop and Sita Ram Goel Memorial Fund, Delhi, dependent on the Indic Academy, Hyderabad. He has authored a dozen peer-reviewed papers, co-authored several books, contributed to a dozen more. You can go to Amazon books. You will find out the list of books that he has written. And authored 18 English and 8 Dutch books of his own. He has participated in numerous academic and other conferences and organized one. His publications mainly concern divergent aspects of the subcontinent's interreligious situations, Indo-European studies, the fundamental question of religious thought, democracy, language policy in both European Union and India. He has also studied aspects of Taoism and taken part in many short retreats of Zen, Vipassana, Himalayan Yoga, Rishikesh, Holland, then Arshvidya Gurukulam Coimbatore, and Yoga Niketan Rishikesh, Brahmarshi Ashram Chandigarh. He had been to India quite a while. And I was listening to one of his speeches on YouTube yesterday. He says that he's a student of engineering, student of sciences. He came to Indology. He studied Chinese philosophy first, and he was influenced by. Then he will talk about that. Recently, these books are there. Some of the books are Negationism in India, Decolonizing the Hindu Mind. Still no trace of Aryan invasion theory. A very important contribution he has made. And I was listening to him. Someone was saying that we thank him very less because he has come out with the myth of Aryan invasion theory that we talk about. Aryans have come, and he says, no, this is a myth. And that is a very important contribution he has made. Still no trace of Aryan invasion theory, Saffron Swastika and other books he has written. As madam has said, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha, these are 4 important Purusharthas. Dharma is, in Indian tradition, we call it as a duty. And another word, Moksha, that has been defined by Adi Shankara as Moksha is nothing but a place after, attaining after death. It says, Adnyana Vishaya Granthi Moksha, that is coming out of the darkness is Moksha. So I think this entire lecture is also a kind of that opportunity for all of us to listen to him. Now I request Koenraad Elst to please deliver his lecture. Thank you very much.
Yes. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pariksha. Okay, it's working. Pratah Swasti. क्षमा कीजिए कि मैं अभी अंग्रेजी में बोलूंगा. मेरी हिंदी इतने अच्छी नहीं है और ये सुंदर भाषा मराठी मुझे बिल्कुल नहीं आती है, जो केवल अंग्रेजी में बात करेंगे. Okay. So we're going to talk about Dharma and Moksha. We start with Dharma. And before we even broach the subject of Dharma, we are going to talk about Deen, the Arabic equivalent. Yes. So maybe some people here are called Shahabuddin or Kamaruddin or Badaruddin or something. Now, this word in Urdu usually means Islam, but actually it has an older and more universal meaning. Deen in the Semitic languages, Hebrew and Arabic, means both religion and justice. Like there is a related derived Hebrew word dayan, which means a judge. Okay. So Deen has these two meanings of justice and religion. It's very profound. And that happens to make it an exact equivalent of the Sanskrit word dharma. You see, there is nowadays a school of thought, most visibly represented by Raji Malhotra, that speaks about Sanskrit untranslatable, that there are some Sanskrit concepts that you cannot possibly translate into another language. Now, I disagree. It is true that some Sanskrit concepts are very sophisticated and very hard to translate. Now, that is simply a translator's job. Find the exact equivalent. It's not always obvious. Sometimes you have to coin a new word, but it is ultimately possible. And in this case, it has a long history, particularly the translation of Sanskrit terms into Chinese by the Buddhists. And so sometimes they gave up. Sometimes they thought, no, I can't find a translation. You know, like nirvana, there is no Chinese word for nirvana. They simply take the Sanskrit word and then like make it Chinese sounding. But in many cases, they have found something to their satisfaction. And dharma in Chinese is a fa, which in ordinary Chinese is the meaning law. So again, we are back to this meaning of justice, righteousness. So in this case, for Arabic at least, there is a perfect translation of dharma, which is deen. Okay, now what does dharma mean? It's a late Vedic term. You see, in the Vedas from the very beginning, you have a related concept. And in fact, I find it back in the name of the student paper here, Artha. Artha is, has to do with Urtu, the name for season. And it really means the correct sequence of the different parts of a cycle. You see the sequence of summer, autumn, winter, and so on. So that's fine. And it already has the meaning of introducing a certain norms. You live differently, you do different things in summer as opposed to winter. And so if somebody is very lightly dressed in winter, you will ask, what's wrong with you? Aren't you feeling cold? And vice versa. So as a text from the Bible sung by the birds used to go, to everything turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. Okay, that's the meaning of Urtu. You see the correctness. You see the doing the right thing at the right time. Okay, so Dharma is a more evolved concept. It is very normative. It says what you should do, and its meaning is that which sustains, that which carries, that which underlies something, that which gives firmness. In fact, the Latin word firm is related to the word dharma. Like in a body, it means the bone system, the skeleton, which gives firmness to all the rest. Right. So it sketches a normative behavior in two senses. It is the correct behavior of a being versus other beings. So everyone you meet in society, and also everything else. You see the birds and the trees and the world as a whole, those are other creatures, fellow creatures, and you have to be correct with them also. In Western terms, we call ethics. Yeah. And that's a fairly common translation among Western philosophers of the Sanskrit concept, dharma. However, dharma is also the correct behavior vis-a-vis the creature, no, the creator, rather. Namely to God, or however you conceive the divine sphere. The correct interaction of the parts of the whole with other parts of the whole, that's ethics, and the correct relation between a part of the whole and the whole itself. The correct relation between any entity and the divine. So there you have the two meanings of ethics and religion. And so if Westerners translate dharma as religion, it's very defective, except in a large sense, in the sense that religion also entails certain rules of behavior. Okay, in that sense, you could say religion, but if you take religion in a narrower sense of worship, then that would do injustice to the term dharma or the term deen. Indeed, I've written a lot about the contrast between Islam and Hinduism, but in this case, they are very similar. You see, in Islam, you have the whole idea of religion finding its expression in the Sharia, the law, and so that's entirely a part of Islam. That's why if this government is ever getting serious about a common civil code, it will run into quite some resistance because the Muslim clergy correctly feels that their Islamic law is part of Islam. You can't divorce it. It's a Christian thing to divorce religion in the strictest sense from the law, which is historically understandable because Christianity started as some nervous little sect in the Roman Empire where they couldn't possibly impose their own law. They scrapped the Hebrew law, the biblical law, and instead they simply accepted the law of the land, whatever the powerful Roman Empire imposed. And so from then on, you get a divorce between the worldly sphere with its laws and the strictly religious sphere. In that sense, secularism is already embedded in Christianity from the beginning. There's this separation between what to do and who for to do it. And so in Hinduism, traditionally, you also have this union between worship and the law. This is what the Shastras are for. So the Shastras are kind of a Hindu equivalent for the Sharia in Islam. Okay, so religion has its physical expression through righteousness, through justice. What the contents are of justice, now there are very many different opinions about it, even within Hinduism. Different shastras have somewhat different rules. But at least the principle, and that's what we want to talk about today, is that religiosity finds expression in behavior, in rules of behavior. Okay, and so the Dharma is there all the time. It's the central topic of the Mahabharata and of the Dharma Shastras. And so its importance is logical, obvious, not disputed at all. By contrast, moksha is a very precarious thing. And indeed, many societies, many religions have no notion of moksha. And even Hinduism at a certain time, I'm not sure if I can say it had no notion of moksha, but it certainly doesn't mention it. The Vedic rishis talk about everything, but not about moksha. Now, of course, what the Vedic rishis exactly taught, there is, let's say there is research going on. The jury is still out. For example, very, very profound topic that modern Indians tend to identify with Nehruvian secularism is there already in the beginning of the Vedas. The oldest you can get, like 5,000 years old. Ekam sat vipara bahudha vadanti. And the reality is one, and the sages call it by many names. So the opposition between the one and the many is taken care of. The one expresses itself through many aspects, many faces, which each you can personalize into a different God. But so ultimately there is no conflict between the one and the many. So the Vedas do have very profound concepts that many Indologists quite wrongly identify with later stages of development. Like, for example, the Vedic rishis worshipped Tad, that, like Tat Savitur Varenyam. So you see, in the modern West, you have something that they call, well, in my language, itsism, which means in English, somethingism. And this refers to the very, very many ex-Christians, millions of them, who you know, if questioned, they assure you that no, I don't believe in God. No, but there is something, you know. So these people are the somethingists. Well, you see, in a way, 5,000 years ago, the Vedic rishis already were somethingists, you know, Tad. Yeah, they had it. So you see, in a sense, profound concepts like moksha might have been there, even though not under that name. And so the whole activity of yoga, of looking for the ultimate, may well predate the Vedas. And so they're not explicitly the topic of the Vedas, but in the background, this yogic consciousness is already there. And here and there it pops up. Like, for instance, the same hymn that I quoted from Ekam Sat Viprabhahudha Vadanti, that also has the famous simile of the two birds sitting in one tree. The one eats from the berries and the other just watches. And this then is later taken up in one of the Upanishads for, philosophical explanation. It effectively symbolizes the difference between pravarti and nivrti, between engagement with the world and renunciation. But so that's already there in the beginning of the Vedas, and without any technical philosophical explanation, but the image of a very powerful philosophical insight is already there and indicates that this deeper insight was also there. You see, there are many ancient Vedic images that later are given a very explicit meaning, but that explicit meaning may have been there implicitly since the beginning. For example, in Tibetan Buddhism, you have the concept of Vajra, the lightning, also the diamond, and it's a symbol of sudden enlightenment. We'll go into the meaning of the word enlightenment, but so it can come through a process gradually, through training, but at some point, suddenly it breaks through like a lightning bolt. That's Vajra. Now, in the Vedas, the Vajra is the weapon of Indra. And there it simply seems, some cartoon, this fellow in the sky wielding the lightning. Yeah, that's how you can picture it. But you see, these pictures don't come by themselves. They are expressions of something deeper. So I think the concept of sudden enlightenment is already there since the beginning. Okay. So you see how yoga came about, that's a bit in the midst of time. Nowadays, there is a school of scholars who say, oh, it all started with the Buddha. You see, a mere 2,500 years ago. In Indian history, that's recently, okay? And so they have this paradigm, very European, 19th century European, but still persisting and still very popular in India, by the way. Namely, Hinduism bad, Buddhism good. You see, Hinduism the problem, Buddhism the solution. Hinduism the childhood, Buddhism the maturity. Hinduism superstitious, Buddhism rational. So that paradigm is still very, very, very alive. And so if there is anything good at all in Hinduism, according to that school, it must have been borrowed from Buddhism. And if there is anything negative in Buddhism, it must be a contamination from Hinduism. Okay. So they say yoga, which in the West at the moment is very popular, that's classified as good. So therefore it can't be Hindu. So it must have been borrowed from the Buddha. Where did the Buddha get it all? Is an open question. if we study the life of the Buddha, in fact, he studied under several Hindu meditation masters. And indeed, the techniques he learned there, the technique of nothingness, that's the name of one of the meditations. And another one is neither perception nor non-perception. They are in the Buddhist curriculum of meditation training. They are the two last stages before the nirvana. So it's not that he rejected them as some modern introductory textbooks claim. In fact, I read stuff like he left them in disgust. No. You see, if you complete your training, then you just finish and you go somewhere else. I mean, if you have your diploma, you don't stay hanging around in your school. Okay, so at some point, the Buddha had mastered these techniques and he moved on. It's like the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, you don't honor your master by remaining his pupil. Okay? And the Buddha remained friends with them. And so when under the Bodhi tree, he had developed his own meditation and had success with it, reached nirvana. The first thing he did after he came down from the experience was to send for these two masters. Hey, I discovered something. You need to hear about this. Unfortunately, they had already died. But, at any rate, there is a total continuity between what the Buddha learned and what then he himself added. So the Buddha did not invent much. You see, he mostly continued what was already there. So it's the principle of the shoulders he stood on. You see, the British physicist Isaac Newton was congratulated by his colleagues. Wow, you see what you discovered is amazing. And he said, well, if I could see very far, it is only because I stood on the shoulders of giants. So most has already been achieved. I only added a little. That's the situation of the Buddha. So the Buddha did not invent much new. It was there already. And indeed, if you go back 1,000, 2,000 years before the Buddha, in the last book of the Rig Veda, you have a whole description of professional yogis. And so they band together in a community that is perfectly comparable with what we know now as the Naga sadhus. They're walking around sky-clad. They have matted hair, and so they wander around, they're homeless, and they do the yoga thing. Though the Vedas don't use the word yoga. By the way, I mean, I hear some Hindu apologists claim that yoga goes back to the Vedas. Well, maybe the idea of yoga goes back to the Vedas, but the word yoga in the Vedas is a totally different meaning. You see, yoga is related to the English word yoke, which in this case means yoking the horses to a chariot, which means taking the horses out of the stable and leaving for the battlefield. Yoga in the Vedas means war. That's a slightly different thing. But so later on, yoga acquires the classical meaning. This is in the Katha Upanishad, where it is said yoga is closing the senses and stilling the mind. That's all. Technical definition of yoga. There's nothing much more to say about it. And then later you get to the Yoga Sutra by Patanjali, which is a kind of setting the record straight, because there were all kinds of people doing yoga and having very different conceptions of what it was that they were doing. So typically they were sitting down and doing breathing exercises and so on. But what they thought they were doing was often very different. And so the common people at that time saw yoga mostly as a way of achieving siddhis, special powers. You see, they thought that yogis were miracle workers. And so Patanjali sets the record straight. He said, if there are any special powers involved. And personally, I've never seen those special powers. The only thing that I can credit some yogis with is a power of telepathy. That I've actually witnessed myself. You see, that they can read thoughts. And not all of them, but some of them have this particular siddhi. Okay, so Patanjali says, you see, these things are side effects. They're not what you do it for. You forget about those, concentrate on the goal, which is, well, I can't say it's moksha because Patanjali doesn't use that term. He calls it kaivalya, which is a separation. The word kaivalya happens to be related to the Latin word koileps, from which you get the English word celibate. Celibate means keeping men and women separate. Okay. Now, in this case, it means keeping consciousness and the objects of consciousness separate. So consciousness is directed only to consciousness itself. And that's the definition of yoga that Patanjali gives. Patanjali says in the second verse of his Yoga Sutra, yoga is the stopping of the motions of the mind. Then the seer, the conscious being, rests in himself. Okay, so then consciousness is not busy with other things, objects of consciousness, not objects outside, not dreams, not imagination, not memories. You see, is only busy with itself. That is his definition of yoga. And so within the Sankhya philosophy, this is conceived of as a separation of consciousness from nature. Except for consciousness itself. But so all memory, all imaginations, everything that modern psychology and neurology deal with, traumas, fears, hopes, and so on, they're all part of nature. So they are all to be excluded if you want to reach Kaivalya. Okay? So yoga is not just sitting and dreaming and so on. No. Yoga is serious business. It means letting all those things go, concentrating only on consciousness itself. Okay, so he doesn't use the term moksha, others do. Moksha means to be free from something, either just intellectually conceived, to be free from the false identification of consciousness with its objects. So objects of consciousness are thoughts, first of all, thoughts of the past, thoughts of the future, thoughts of what is possible. Then the thought content of dreams, for example, is also part of it. So all those are not consciousness. And so most of the time when you sit, daydreaming, you are totally full of whatever thoughts that you are entertaining at that moment. So you have to deliberately stop that. So that is moksha from what is called in Sanskrit avidya. ignorance. So ignorance, what is ignorance? It is the false identification of consciousness with the objects of consciousness. Okay. So there you have a purely technical concept of moksha. Moksha is the achieved state of yoga, is the final goal of yoga. This is often identified with the specifically Buddhist conception of moksha. You see, in Buddhism, you have the idea that through meditation, you achieve a state, not just where your consciousness is silent, is calm, but where, moreover, this has the effect of stopping the cycle of reincarnations. Now, here you see I differ with what most Hindus think, namely that the goal of yoga is to stop the cycle of reincarnations. And you see, I don't even know if there is such a thing as reincarnation. I've met very few people who claim to be conscious of their own past reincarnations. Some people are, and some people even can tell me what my past incarnations were. Now, I don't know if it's true because I have no memory of those. So that's a very specific belief, but that's not necessary for the notion of moksha or enlightenment or so. You see in the Vedas, the rishis never mention reincarnation. Now, I had many fights over this with traditionalist Hindus who insist that the Vedas are the source of the doctrine of reincarnation. Well, I don't know what the rishis really believed in their heart of hearts, but at least they never mention it. And then in the Chandogya Upanishad, they describe the discovery of reincarnation. They themselves say this is an innovation. We didn't know about it. And yet, at that moment, they already have achieved the pinnacle of Hindu philosophy, namely the notion of the self, the Atman. That's there in the first Upanishad, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. The self is nirguna, is without qualities. It's not big nor small. It's not black nor white. It's not male nor female, as argued in a famous debate described in the Mahabharata between the nun Sulabha and King Janaka. So she wins the debate on the argument that the self male nor female, beyond all pairs of opposition, including that between male and female. Okay, so the self is not any of those things. It is what you experience in the ultimate state of yoga. When there is nothing else that you're busy with, all that remains is this basic unit of consciousness, the self. So that idea is already there, and only then do they discover reincarnation, right? So you don't have to believe in reincarnation to pursue moksha. And so I suppose you know the story. There is this Shweta Ketu, a young fellow who has been sent away for his training in the whole, philosophy. And because, if they stay home, they will be too pampered by their mother and so on. So they go somewhere else. And so he learns the whole thing. He gets his diploma, so to speak, and he returns home. And one of the boys that as a kid he has been playing with in the playground asks him, wow, now you have studied everything, you know everything. Okay, tell me, what happens after death? And then Shvetaketu realizes, I've never studied that. I don't know. And he go asks his father. And so the father also doesn't know. And then he approaches a friend of his who happens to be the king, probably the father of that boy who asked the first question. And he knows. And he explains, oh, well, then you get, you go to heaven and then you come back, reincarnation. He also explains that this is why they, the Kshatriyas, the kings, why they are in power. You see, if you believe in reincarnation, you end up being in power. That's why the Hindus have won all the wars, of course. You see, and this is explained what the connection is. You see, let's first start outside India. The people of Gaul, present-day France, have interest in Rome, in the Celtic habits and beliefs and so on. Both Caesar and Cicero describe that they believe in reincarnation, and therefore they are totally fearless on the battlefield. Why is that? What is the connection? Well, the connection is explained by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita. He says to Arjuna, but you shouldn't fear, because if you die on the battlefield, well, tomorrow you come back. It's like you take off your clothes to sleep. Tomorrow you put on fresh clothes. There you are. And moreover, you need not have scruples to kill others, even if they are your nephews. Because they too, if they die, well, they come back tomorrow. So there is not really any death, not for you, not for them. So therefore, you can go on the battlefield without fear and without scruples, so you can fight to the fullest. And so you win. And if you win, you have the power. So you see, that's this new doctrine of reincarnation, which in Hinduism is present, though I would say by far not as centrally as it is in Buddhism. You see, the Buddha speaks of his own former lives constantly. Whenever he refers to events from the past, he immediately adds, oh yeah, and back then, 500 years ago, I was this. And so for him, it's a living reality. And so he says, okay, you see, because of the desires that we die with, we are motivated to come back. And that's, how this cycle ever keeps repeating. It's only when all desires die down that we don't feel this urge to come back. And that then the whole cycle stops. But you see, in non-Buddhist writings, it's by far not as strong as that. There are cases, like, for instance, in the Mahabharata, you have Amba, the elder sister of Ambika and Ambalika, who suffers a great setback in life thanks to Bhishma. So she's very angry with Bhishma, and she vows to take revenge on him. She dies, then she gets reborn as Shikandin, and she's the one who fires the arrow that kills Bhishma. So, there you have cases of people who carry a certain luggage from a past life to the next life. And that's the law of Dharma. So yeah, this belief in reincarnation has a certain effect but not as centrally, And ultimately, I argue that is really not important. You see, in a yogic state, where you don't think of the past or the future, you see, it's totally unimportant if you have had past lives or not, or if you're going to have future lives or not, because you're totally in the here and now. Indeed, there is a form of meditation among the Greek school called the Stoa. And so the Stoics every day practiced an hour of meditation every morning, and they call this meditation to stay in the now. Because you see, in ordinary states, you are busy with your experiences of yesterday and your duties for tomorrow and so on. To stay in the now means to forget all about this, to stay in your consciousness as it is now. So for moksha, this idea of moksha from past lives, from the cycle of life and so on, is one way to understand it, but I don't think it's essential. You see, moksha ultimately means to be free from ignorance. Now, is this important for Hindus? I don't know, not sure. You see, Hindus I meet are very concerned with worldly things. Like for me as a traveler, you see, I find it most pleasant to experience how Hindus care about me, make sure everything is, foreseen. Yes. And so there is something virtuous about it, something dharmic. Yes. But you see, the care for moksha, I don't see much of it. And indeed, a naughty yoga teacher in the West who spent a lot of time in India, you see, he got a question from some Westerner. Yeah, but you see, is yoga really fit for Western people? Is it not something typically Oriental? And he smiled and he said, I think more meditation is being done in the West than in India. And what he meant was this. In India, there's always so much life. You see, if you go to a temple or even to an ashram, it'll be difficult to find a moment of silence. It's always so noisy. They're always busy with bhajans and so on. Even when they're meditating, they're not sitting in silence. No, they're sitting on Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya, Om Namah Shivaya. So it's always some talk going on. And yeah, well, so Aghehananda Bharati, Swami Aghehananda Bharati, who was actually a German who came to India and was ordained as a Swami, but we could very well compare the two. So he said, in India, they don't do meditation, they talk about meditation. They talk about, oh yeah, our great rishis and look what they did. And so they identify with the greats in their own civilization, but they don't imitate them. Well, to an extent, that's very understandable. Because you see, yoga is a serious business. Not everyone can do it. Most people simply have all kinds of worldly duties. And so to really sit down in silence is hard to do. And so they leave that to specialists. And so instead of seeing some Swami and emulating him, instead they worship him. You see, they let him do the yogic work, and they will do everything, that is needed to make this lifestyle possible for him. which of course is okay. It has to do with the Indian, also Chinese, which I think is in many cultures, the tendency to specialization. You see, an American man will be able to repair his own car, right? In Europe, that's already less. In India, I don't see much of it because you have specialists to do that. Let them do that. And in a way, that's also socially far more useful because you provide labor to everyone. So instead of doing somebody else's work poorly, I let a specialist do it well, and I concentrate on my work so that I do it well. That's a very sensible attitude. And so regarding yoga, that tends to mean that people concentrate on practices that approximate yoga, like to say, to do japa, but to leave the really hard work to specialists. And that makes sense, and that, among other things, has the result that in India you do find qualified masters. You see, in the West you have all these people who try to sell some spiritual message, but they don't have it. In a yogic path, you have all kinds of experiences that feel uplifting compared to what you were before, but that are still very far from the goal. Now, you have many people who dabble in spirituality and they have some such experiences, and then they think, now I have it. Now I can go and teach and so on. This is it. Where in fact, they're only taking their first steps on the path. So the good thing about the Hindu situation is that you really make a place in society for specialists, for people who do nothing but that and who do it well. I've heard from monks of the Ramakrishna mission that, yeah, monks shouldn't only be meditating, they should also go out and, draw up their sleeves and do work for charity. No, you see, that's a Christian notion that monks and certainly nuns should do charity. You see, the Hindu idea is that charity is to be done by society. Society has to take care of its own. Whereas the job of monks is to be free. And so freedom starts with certain practical arrangements, like, for instance, they're not married. So they have no family responsibilities, because that's what takes up a lot of the time of most people. So to be free also means to deny yourself certain things so that you can stay free. And then you develop mental freedom. You learn to disattach yourself from all the stuff that you're usually attached to. And then, by the way, you become happy. That's a side effect, not so important. You see, in the true yogic state, you're neither happy nor unhappy, neti. But you see, usually if you practice yoga, a certain cheerfulness ensues. I've never heard of a yogi committing suicide. Yeah. Except at the end of his life, when his life is over, then maybe he gives the honor to himself and fasts unto death, or so that can happen. But like Vinayak Damodar Savarkar fasts unto death, Vinoba Bhave fasts unto death, so it happens. And indeed, under giant pressure, recently the Supreme Court has sidelined. They don't have the power to abolish, only Parliament can do that, but they have effectively rendered ineffective a British law against voluntary death. Okay, so this voluntary death may be there in extreme cases, literally extreme, that is to say, at the end of life. But so generally, they're happy people. And indeed, I can relate some personal experience along the same lines. At age 47, I was suffering a heart disease, and the end had come. So they could keep me alive for a few more weeks, then I would die. This is 15 years ago. Yeah. But then, when I was in the hospital, I heard the doctor speaking about heart transplant. I had never considered a heart transplant. I thought that through natural means, Ayurveda or something, I would be able to cure myself. No, I wasn't. And indeed, the Ayurvedic doctors, the acupuncture doctors, and so on, they all said, well, we can do many things, but this we can't treat. So anyway, then I went into hospital for a heart transplant. I had to wait for 2 months and a half before somebody was kind enough to die and leave his heart to me. And so during that time, I was like quite worried about the chances of dying. I still had small children. I thought they're too early to do without me, too young to do without me. But then I got depressed. You see, there is a lot of writing about depression and what to do about depression. I didn't have the experience at all. And so suddenly, yes, I was very depressed. I couldn't laugh anymore. I couldn't think of anything seriously. There was only one thing I thought was terrible. And then I thought, you see, there's nothing I can do. I was hanging with all these threads to some machine and stuff, and nothing I could do. But I could leave something off. That I could still do. So every day at noon, we got food. And so there were a few ordinary things, vegetables, and then there was a little dessert, a little, ice cream. So I said, okay, let's not have that ice cream. So every day I bit my tongue and I said, no ice cream. And after a few days, I felt great. You see, that was the only little freedom I still had. Okay, let's, rather than eat it, let's not eat it. And so that little bit of tiage, of, you see, abandoning, that already did the trick, right? So as a side effect of yoga, and you see in the West, most people are not really interested in the goal of yoga, only in the side effects of yoga. Well, one side effect is that you feel great. So, that's less than moksha, but it's already something. Many people would do it for that. However, moksha does remain the goal. And so whether moksha is there as long as dharma, I'm not sure. I think it goes back quite far, but in terms of historical evidence, maybe only to the age of the Upanishads. It's more than the Buddha, but not much more. But I'm not sure of that. You see, from a Western viewpoint at the moment, Western societies, of course, have a kind of dharma. Maybe not the same as in India, but they have a notion of norms, of having to do, of duties, of righteousness. But the idea of moksha usually is not there. You see, that has recently been imported from India. And so maybe India itself has gone through a similar history where first this notion was not there, and then it was, discovered and then became common. Okay, well, let's go for it. Huh? Are there any objections or questions? Especially the objections will be very interesting.
There will be a couple of questions
question and answer session. Yeah, that was great.
Thank you very much. Hello, hello. Paresh, आवाज येत नाही. Hello, hello. There will be a couple of questions. Thank you, madam. I think students must have enjoyed it, and I was having a stall in the audience. Some students have some questions. I think we'll take one question. Yeah, Shri Sheshadri.
Sir, hello, sir.
Sir, just a minute. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a doubt. I'll read out my doubt so that I should not be missing any points. So my doubt is when a person attains moksha at that time, he neither experiences happiness nor sadness, right? That means nothing is triggering him to work for society. My point here is if a person is sensible enough to experience the pain which certain deprived section of people, a certain deprived section of the society are going through, then only he or she can work on that, right? But how could a person who has attained moksha can do that? And does that indicate a person who has attained moksha is of no use to society?
So she's asking ones who attain moksha is of no use to society.
Yeah.
So once we get moksha, then we don't care for society. So she's saying, what about that? Right?
Well, the idea is that people who attain moksha don't have to care for society. Society itself has to care for society. And, but of course, you see, that's a problem that has existed since the beginning. That's why people oriented to the karma marga, the way of action, always had a problem with this whole moksha business because those people weren't paying their debts. You see, like for instance, especially in the matter of family formation, the idea was that renunciates would not have a family. Now, they, since the Vedas are subject to having a debt to pay to their ancestors. You pay your debt to your ancestors by procreating the next generation. All the former generations have taken the trouble of procreating, and that's why you are there. So you have a heavy debt to all of them, and you pay off that debt by procreating again. And so that's always problematic. You see, parents who have only one child, for instance, will not want him to choose a celibate life. The famous case is that of Shankara. You see, Shankaracharya wanted to become a monk. His mother didn't want to let him do that. And then he had to trick her into giving her permission. You see, he claimed to be drowning or something. And then he said, "Mother, I am dying. Please, I want to die as a monk. Give me the permission." And then she gave it. And then smilingly, he came out of the water and, lived on, but now as a monk. But so that was always problematic because he had this notion of paying your debt to your ancestors, which you only do by starting a family. And so in a similar sense, you could say, you pay your dues to society by joining in the activities of society, for instance, by being economically productive and so on. So you have this whole burden of life, a number of duties that follow simply from your being alive. And you stop all that by becoming a renunciate. Now, that may be justifiable if, on condition that the renunciate does produce something that could not happen in any other way, and that is valuable. And that is the case, you see. He becomes enlightened, and nobody else does. I mean, there may be a few cases like Ramana Maharshi. He was a young lad, and suddenly he experienced enlightenment, and then he became a yogi after that. So, okay, there are all kinds of cases. Difference is something very typical for Hinduism, But so the general rule is that people withdraw from society, but then in a sense also give something of a new type, of a very extraordinary type back to society, namely enlightenment. And you see, that's the difference between Hindu society and Western society. Here you live like with an umbrella above you of some people who are enlightened. It is like, children playing in the park. Either they play on their own, with all risks accompanying that, or they play in the park while on a bench at the edge of the park, their mother is sitting. And keeping an eye without interfering, but just being there. Okay? That's what enlightened people are in a society for all the others. So they don't have to do anything, but just to be there makes a difference. So in that sense, you see, they don't have to do their duty to society the way that other people do, but still they contribute to society.
Yeah. There is another question, sir. We'll take one or two and then we'll end.
Yes,
Shall we? Do we have many questions, students? Yeah, there are so many questions.
Okay.
Let us be brief. Yeah, please.
thank you very much for your wonderful session. Very in-depth and quite insightful also. Thank you so much. Now we understand that there are two types of dharma, major classifications. One is Naimitika dharma, other one is Nitya dharma. And we also understand that Bhagavad Gita is a cream of all the Vedic literatures, of all the Vedas. Vedas came first, and then Lord himself came and he gave from his own mouth the Bhagavad Gita. And there he clearly says two things. One is about the reincarnation, which there was a doubt, but he clearly ascertains that, saying that Dehinosmi yata dehe komaram yo vanamja tata dehantaram praptim dhiras tatra muyati. That means the body, as it grows from a youth to, from a child to youth to old age to death, again there's a cycle of reincarnation. So that's established.
Yeah.
The second point is about you said whether there's a mention of word yoga in the scriptures or not. It is there because Bhagavad Gita teaches us about Dharma Yoga, it is about Jnana Yoga, Dhyana Yoga, and then Buddhi Yoga, Bhakti Yoga. And then finally, after giving all this explanation, he says, Yoginam api sarvesham. Of all the yogas, the topmost is Mat Gate Antar Atmana. Shraddhavan Bhajante Ma. Same Yukta Tatomataha. That means of all these yogas, the topmost yoga is Bhakti Yoga. And the one who is meditating about me, that is the topmost. In my opinion, Krishna says this verdict. And then it is also mentioned that if Bhagavad Gita is
Sir, let us be brief, because there are some
Okay.
other questions.
But I get your point. There's already a lot
Running
to
out of
say to
time,
this.
please.
Yes. Well, you see, as a historian here, I differ with most scripture quoters. A problem among very many people, Christian fundamentalists also have it. But here in India, I see a lot of it, is the lack of a sense of time depth. You see, you say scripture says, but you see, what I would answer to that is yes, some late scripture, the Bhagavad Gita says that, but you see, before that came about, there were already 2,000 years or so of writings where, different views prevail. And so the Bhagavad Gita is already very much a work of synthesis, which builds upon an already existing literature about yoga. It comes after, for example, the Katha Upanishad, where you have an explicit description of what yoga is. And so he refers to Karma Marga, Jnana Marga, and so on, stuff that already exists, that predates the Gita. And so then he adds to it, well, yeah, okay, there are many conceptions of yoga, and there is one I disagree with. And now, of course, you can say that I am a non-comprehending Westerner, Malaysia, and so on. Maybe so, but you see, I think applying the definition of yoga by the Katha Upanishad, by Patanjali, I disagree with the idea that the highest yoga is bhakti. You see, bhakti is something else than what Patanjali defines, then the seer rests in himself. Because if you do bhakti, you're concentrated on something outside you. And like, for instance, if you say, oh, yoga means union with God, well, that means that there are two persons involved, you and God. Now, that's not yoga according to Patanjali. That's not yoga according to Vedanta. There is no one else. Atma is Brahma. There is no worship of Brahma. No, Atma is Brahma. At least as the Advaita view of Vedanta, which happens to be very popular in the West, where all these ex-Christians like myself, don't want to go back to worshiping something. They find precisely that yoga is an alternative to that in the sense that it's non-dual. There's no difference between the worshipper and the worship. No, it's one. And so to pull them apart again, as you do in Vishishtadvaita, for example, and so as Krishna does here, I think personally that that's a mistake. You see, the Indians had yoga, they had discovered yoga, and then some people thought, that's perhaps a bit too demanding, then bhakti is simpler. And so I'm all for bhakti in the sense of the collateral effects of bhakti. You see, both in Hinduism, but also in Catholicism, you have an enormous production of art, of beauty, and so on that follows from bhakti. You see, Christian devotionalism has also led to cathedrals and paintings and sculptures and so on, beautiful. And so in India, the same thing. You go to temples, it's great what you see there, the music you hear there, the Bharat Natyam, and so on and so on. So the production following from a mood of bhakti is enormous. And so bhakti, yes, has a role to fulfill. But being a bit of a purist for whom it has to be correct and not approximative, I say, no, bhakti is not the highest. You see, in the highest state, there is no duality. There is not a worshipper and a worshipped one.
Yeah,
So that's where I disagree with whoever wrote the Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, where is the mic? Yeah, we are running short of time. At 12 o'clock, some students have lecture as well, I heard. So there is murmuring at the backside. Let us take quick questions and quick answers. Very quick.
Very nice lecture, sir. My question is very brief. As you said, that religion and ethics are in a way intellect, and religion in a way commands over ethics. Do you think the world would be any different if it didn't have any religion? Would humans still be ethical?
Very good.
Oh, depends on how you define religion, of course. Again, that's a very modern Western answer. If you say, "Oh, do you believe in God?" Then the answer is, "Oh, it depends on how you define God." Now, of course, that's a very voguish answer, but at the same time, I think it's a correct answer. It depends. And so, is religion necessary? Well, you could say that worship in temples and so on is very, very, very strictly not necessary, and indeed the Vedic people did without it. I mean, they had upasana, which was in the open air, but in spirit it's the same as worshiping in temples. Okay, but you did have atheism also. You see, and I don't just mean the Charvakas or the Jains. The Sankhya philosophy in origin is atheist. It discerns consciousness from nature, but there's no third party called God. There's no creator because it is explicitly said both nature and consciousness are eternal, are uncreated, adya. So, God is a way of seeing things, is a personification of the absolute. And in an evolved intellectual culture, you couldn't do without that personification. But there is still the absolute. There is still artha. Yes.
Yeah.
Last
There is a, yeah, quickly, very quickly. Go ahead.
So my question was, as you said, moksha consists of enlightenment by renunciation, where the person neither they have no plan towards society. But then it's the Japanese concept where enlightenment and the meaning of life is achieved when the person gives something towards the society, which gives them meaning as well as happiness. So in that exact sense, what exactly is moksha?
So according to Japanese philosophy, she says that after attaining moksha, someone should give back to society. So in that sense, I think he has answered.
Yeah,
the question.
you see, what
Yeah,
what
that
what
question has
what
been
an
already
enlightened person gives back to society is perhaps helping those interested in also reaching enlightenment. I mean, you can fill a life with that. It's very meaningful.
Okay. Yeah. Let this. Yes. Shravani, quickly. Yeah. Very quick question.
Okay. And my question to you is very direct. So you claim that the more meditation is being practiced in the West and Indians are not drawn towards the culture. So as next question, what do you feel? Why aren't they drawn towards their cultural roots and why are people not practicing yoga? And what do you think rather than the practice?
Well, if I understood your question right, I'd say that what is happening in the West is a churning. And so people are in all kinds of starting positions. You see, some have not grown away from Christianity, are actually converts from one religion to another, but most, you see, are in a vacuum and they experiment with things and some things work. And so, you see, there is like a return to pre-Christian religions, fringe, 1-2% of the population. But you see, the move towards yoga or towards Chinese systems, Taoism, that's very large and that continues to expand. And so I think you're going to get a situation like it was in ancient paganism, namely that you have all kinds of different sects coexisting. And, there is a general thing called religiosity, a sense of Dharma, and people give all kinds of different understandings of that and practices that follow from those. So, I think right now we are seeing the beginning of a new situation that will last for very long. Is a natural situation. You see, Christianity in the very long run, is a bit of an aberration. This type of religion started 2,000 years ago, and which is a blip in the history of mankind, and is not going to last much longer. So this idea of sticking to a dogma, that's almost over.
Yeah.
Namaskar, sir. My question is, the topic of your lecture is Dharma versus Moksha. Why Dharma versus Moksha and not Dharma towards Moksha? Dharma is towards Moksha.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, I mean, the title was given to me, though maybe I would have coined the exact same title in the sense that, yeah, you can say versus because they are two different concerns. You see, like Dharma will make you take social responsibilities. Moksha will make you seek ways of getting rid of these. So there is there are two different things that you can't deny. But of course, they can perfectly harmonize.
Yeah.
But I think that there is also a concept of Swadharma, and Swadharma is a dharma towards your body and yourself, dharma towards self. Okay. So
Yeah.
that is, I don't understand that why dharma versus moksha. So that was my question.
Yeah, I don't see them as enemies. Rest assured.
No, that is, just giving some title so that people can come and we can discuss. So that maybe, we can interpret in this way, right? The organizers can give answers to this question rather. Okay, anyone quickly or we'll end. Thank you very much, Dr. Koenraad. There are so many questions, but I request all students, those who have questions, to meet us after the lecture, and we'll have a wonderful discussion.
Yeah, I'm not going anywhere. I'm remain available.
So he is there with us, along with us today. So I request those who have questions and those who do not have questions, for them, let us not pose other questions. So let us wind up. It's already 12. I conclude. I think he has come out with historical overview of the concept of Dharma and Moksha in his lecture. He has quoted even Vedas, Ekam Sad Vipra Bahuda Vadanti to Patanjali. And then he talked about Tad, that is the word Tad from Tattva Jnana, as we talk about. Then he also comment on various comments, Vajra, Tibetan Buddhism, Patanjali, philology. I find a wonderful coincidence over here because we are sitting in a Panini auditorium, and he has done his PhD on philology, that is the word etymology. So I think we are giving new meanings to various words, and as the Dharma, why verses and why are and other things. So I think this is a wonderful coincidence that we're discussing about etymology of the words and the meaning. It's a wonderful domain altogether. He talked about Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, Chandogya Upanishad, and he also said that this is the discovery of Vedic rishis, of Atman. So I think his lecture was a compact lecture. You may have so many point of understandings and bone of contention also. You may agree, you may disagree. That is the way Indian idea is. Vade vade jayate tattva bodha. So let us agree to disagree. And I think this kind of lectures are very, very important. So I hope we must have received or understood the problem of, the meaning of our life. I was reading a cartoon somewhere, I was watching it right down, it is written there. A young boy was asking to father, so what is the aim of my life? And the father says, try Google. So it was very interesting, and I found, wow. So try Google. So I think with this we conclude. I thank all the dignitaries, those who have come, and our vibrant audience, the students. I think I request all of you to please clap for a moment for all of you. Yeah. Because I was having a stall, people were writing your note, taking notes, and they have questions. I also thank our guest speaker. I also ask you to have another round of clapping once again for Dr. Koenraad Elst, and principals and management, from management also, Bendre sir has come, and all principals, vice principals, teachers, students, media persons, and our program is being live. Dr. Elst, we are live now. People are watching, and even VPM and other people are also listening to us. And for next 2 months, he is there going to be in India. You can have watch on in various states, various places. In just 2 months, he is going to have a round of entire country. Just understand. And he's 63, and we can learn, we can take inspiration from him, that we should also go back to our own roots, cultural roots, understand at least what India talks about and what India is having to offer. Okay, so I think with this, I thank all the people, and we'll end our session with Pasaidan. I request Chaitrali to play Pasaidan. Thank you very much. Please be seated over here for a couple of minutes, and then we'll end. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, students. Thank you. Those who have questions and something to ask, you can come over here. Thank you very much. We'll have a group photo as well, along with the speaker.
Yeah, I will also invite you.
Okay,
We are part of the Institute of Science and Religion
right.
in New Bombay, which is about 30 kilometers from here.
Yeah,
And we do a lot of interfaith studies
yes,
and also on science and spirituality.
right.
We connect the two and we try to, that is our objective actually.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of conferences and seminars.